a stained apron, a locked room, and too many lies. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your voices make these mysteries unforgettable. The case starts now. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee and mentally composing a very polite refusal to the woman who just rung the bell when I noticed the way she gripped her handbag. Not clutching it like it was full of diamonds or secrets, though it may have been both, but the way a boxer keeps a tight fist even in church. She had gray hair like overworked steel wool and a dress that had known better years, but it was that bag that got her through the front door. "You'll want to sit down," I told her. "It's bad manners to sweat standing up when you're not being paid." She didn't laugh. They never do when they mean business. I led her into the front room, strictly off limits to guests unless Wolfe was indisposed, out of town, or unusually indifferent. Since all three conditions were fantasies, this was going to be brief. "I won't keep Mr. Wolfe," she said. Her voice had that lower Manhattan vowel drag, like she'd lived her whole life within walking distance of a tenement and a disappointment. "I only need someone who listens." I gave her my best approximation of sympathy, which Wolfe says looks like a smirk with arthritis, and said, "Mr. Wolfe doesn't listen until he's interested, and he's not interested until someone makes it worth his while." She opened the bag and removed a white apron. Correction, it had once been white. Now it was a mosaic of faint orange stains, faded gray fingerprints, and a single splotch of something dark maroon near the hem. It was folded neatly, like it had just been laundered for a wake. She handed it to me like it was evidence. I held it with 2 fingers. "I worked 28 years at the Del Mar Club kitchen," she said. "That was my apron. It got taken from my locker 3 weeks ago. Yesterday it turned up in a box on my doorstep." "Kind of your locker's way of saying goodbye," I suggested. Her lips compressed into a line I wouldn't want to cross on foot. "There was a note in the box," she added. Typed. "No return address. It said, 'Your apron saw more than you did.'" Now I was interested. I may be Archie Goodwin, not Miss Marple, but even I know when something smells like more than soup stock. I tilted my head. "So, let me guess. You want us to find out what your apron saw before someone else decides to send a napkin with your name on it?" She nodded once. "Something happened at that club. Something they think I might know. I don't." She paused, then added, "But I've got the feeling someone thinks I do, and I don't want to find out the hard way." At that moment, I heard the faint creak upstairs, the telltale protest of Wolfe's office chair leaning backward. He was listening, which meant he was interested, which in turn meant I had about 30 seconds to decide whether to tell the lady to run or walk her secrets up 1 floor. "Wait here," I told her. "Mr. Wolfe may be persuaded to lend an ear, but for God's sake don't tell him you spilled coffee on the rug." I headed upstairs, apron in hand, already rehearsing how to sell a stained kitchen rag to the world's most sedentary detective. Wolfe doesn't budge for less than murder or foie gras. But if there's a stain he can't explain, and a woman who looks like she's been carrying guilt in her purse for a decade, he's likely to stir. "Archie," his voice came before I knocked. I entered. He was in his chair as usual, flanked by the globe and the orchids, 2 things more obedient than I'd ever been. "You heard?" He nodded. "Bring her up and dispose of that wretched cloth on the cabinet. I detest mysteries that arrive with laundry." As I descended, I saw the woman still sitting, her hands now resting on her knees like she was about to be interviewed for sainthood, or sentenced. "Mr. Wolfe will see you." She rose, gathering herself. "Thank you, Mr. Goodwin." I offered her my arm. "If this turns into a federal case, you can call me Archie." The apron stayed behind. But the secrets were coming upstairs. I brought her upstairs with the kind of slow formality Wolfe appreciates. like we were escorting a diplomatic package, not a woman in orthopedic shoes and a cardigan that had seen more seasons than a vineyard. She stepped into the office and hesitated at the threshold, taking in the rows of books, the looming globe, and Wolfe himself seated behind the desk like a judge with a bellyful of constitution. "Sit," he said without looking up. She obeyed. Wolfe finally raised his eyes from the stack of clippings in front of him. Something from the Gazette, no doubt, which he pretends to despise but reads like scripture, and focused on her with the intensity of a man who has no intention of moving but every intention of dissecting your soul. "Your name?" he asked. "Mrs. Frances Lattimore." He steepled his fingers. "You worked at the Del Mar Club?" "For 28 years, she said. "I was the assistant chef." "And your responsibilities?" "Prep work, inventory. Occasionally baking when needed. I kept the kitchen clean and orderly. They called me Mother Franny." Wolfe winced slightly, which for him was the emotional equivalent of a punch to the gut. I saw it. She didn't. "And this apron," he said. "Describe its provenance." She blinked. "My own. Issued when I started. Embroidered with my initials. I kept it in my locker. Used it most days." "You say it vanished?" She nodded. "About 3 weeks ago. I thought maybe it was stolen by the laundry boy or tossed by mistake. I didn't ask questions. It's not uncommon. But then it came back, in a box on my stoop." "With a note," Wolfe murmured. "Yes." I moved to his desk and laid the apron gently across the corner. He reached, not for the apron, but for the letter I'd folded in my pocket. I handed it over. He studied it, eyes narrowing at the type. "No signature," he said. "No letterhead. Standard typewriter, possibly royal. Ribbon nearly dry. The phrasing is coy." I cut in. "You think this is blackmail?" Wolfe snorted. "Number blackmail requires leverage. This is something else. A suggestion, a warning, perhaps." Mrs. Lattimore sat rigid, hands clasped. "I don't know what it means, I swear it, but I've been nervous ever since." "You mentioned something happened at the club," I said. "Something you think someone doesn't want revisited." Her hands fidgeted in her lap. "It's not my place to gossip. The Del Mar is private. Old money. Discretion is the rule." I turned to Wolfe. "Want me to prod?" "No need." "Mrs. Lattimore, what occurred at the club within the last month? Any unusual events, disputes, or sudden changes in personnel?" She paused. Then quietly, "There was a fire. Small, in the rear pantry. It happened after hours. Just some smoke and a scorched door. They said it was faulty wiring." Wolfe looked at me. "Archie, make a note. Fires do not start in pantries by accident. What else?" She sighed. "About a week before that, the club's treasurer, Mr. Greer, resigned suddenly. No explanation, just left a letter and disappeared." "Did he handle payroll?" "Yes." Wolfe closed his eyes. That usually meant the engine in his brain was shifting from neutral to drive. "I suspect," he said, opening them again, "that your apron witnessed something during its absence. Not literally, of course, but symbolically. It was used, present, possibly to wipe something, cover something, or carry something, then returned, not for your benefit, but for ours." He turned to me. "Archie, fetch Saul." That's how you know things are getting serious. When Saul Panzer gets involved, it means Wolfe's given the problem permission to breathe. "Should I go now?" "Immediately. Instruct him to look into Mr. Greer's disappearance, bank records, personal connections, anything irregular in the Del Mar Club's recent filings." "And me?" He gave me a heavy look. "You will go to the Del Mar Club." Mrs. Lattimore stirred. "They won't let you in. You're not a member." "I'm not planning to ballroom dance," I said. "I just want to look around, ask a few harmless questions, pretend I'm a rich man's nephew." Wolfe waved us off with a flick of his hand. "Report by dinner time." Mrs. Lattimore stood. "Will you take the case?" Wolfe gave her a long look, and for a second I thought he might say no just to preserve the sanctity of his afternoon beer. "I will," he said. "But let me be clear. I'm not investigating the theft of an apron. I'm investigating the intention behind its return." She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she was letting on. We saw her out. When the door clicked behind her, I turned and whistled softly. "Well," I said, "that was either the beginning of something very small or very unpleasant." "I suspect the latter," Wolfe replied. "Bring me what the club does not want found." It was noon when I pulled up outside the Del Mara Club, an ivy-covered monument to secrecy wedged between two brownstones on East 63rd. You don't just walk into a place like that unless you have a name, a tie, or an appointment. I had none of the above, but I did have a smile and a card that said Archibald Goodwin, Confidential Inquiry Services, with a fake suite number at the Chrysler Building. Classy enough to bluff, vague enough to be untraceable. The doorman gave me the once-over. I gave him back the same. "I'm here to see Mr. Fallow," I said, inventing a name from thin air. He sniffed. "There's no Mr. Fallow." I frowned theatrically. "He said he worked with the board. Maybe I've got the wrong club. You wouldn't happen to know if there was a fire here recently, would you?" His eyebrows ticked up. "Nothing serious." "Of course," I said. "Just heard something through the grapevine. Friend of a friend said their cousin smelled smoke." He didn't laugh, but his stance shifted, slightly defensive. I dropped it and wandered to the street corner. The club had back access to an alley that was partially fenced off. A delivery door, service entrance. I took a walk. The alley had a burned panel near the far end. Freshly replaced wood, painted quick and sloppily. A little heat had curled the edges of the adjacent brick. Nothing big, but enough. More interesting was the black SUV idling half a block down, engine running, no one inside. Surveillance? Maybe. Or maybe I was getting paranoid. Either way, I made a note. Back at the brownstone by 4, I found Wolfe in his chair, reading a monograph on saffron distribution in 18th century Persia. He looked up and grunted. "Report," he said. I did. He nodded as I spoke, only interrupting to ask, "Any signs of video surveillance?" "None obvious. Just a lot of tight-lipped help and nervous glances." "And Saul?" "Should be here any minute." He was. Saul entered with the quiet efficiency of a man who could follow you into your dreams without being noticed. "Greer," he said, tossing a folder on the desk. "Left the club the same day a wire transfer went out to a shell company. $250,000. All signs point to embezzlement, but, Wolfe echoed. "But Greer didn't vanish. He's dead. Found in the East River last night. Unidentified. No wallet, no ID, but fingerprints match." Silence. Then Wolfe leaned back and said, "Now it begins." And just like that, the case of the returned apron had turned into something more than grease stains and guilt. It had turned into murder. I watched. Wolfe's eyes fix on nothing, his gaze anchored somewhere past the globe, past the orchid shelves, far beyond the brownstone walls. That was his version of motion. The rest of us walked, climbed stairs, took taxis. Wolfe drifted in vectors of deduction, and right now, the current had turned dark. "Dead," he repeated. "Mr. Greer is dead." Saul nodded. "Unreported until this morning. No wallet. The police listed him as a floater. No ID, presumed suicide." Wolfe's lip cooled. "Presumption is for the lazy. Who found him?" "A tug crew. South Pier. Dragged his body tangled in fishing net. Coroner pegged him at 48 hours in the water." "Which aligns," I added, "with the apron's return." Wolfe closed his eyes, digesting the alignment. "And the note, your apron saw more than you did." It wasn't a warning. It was bait. "Bait?" I said, leaning forward. "For who?" For us, Wolfe replied. Specifically for the one person nosy enough to open the box, ask questions, and possibly investigate. Mrs. Lattimore. Whoever sent that note wanted someone to chase the trail Greer left behind, not to protect him, to bury him twice. I turned to Saul. What else do we know about Greer? Middle management type, came into the club about 6 years ago. No family in town, but I traced a phone call he made 4 days before his disappearance. Ah, Wolfe said. Here it comes. To a woman named Elizabeth Stannis. Her name popped up again this morning. She was arrested outside the Del Mar Club last night, causing a scene. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of scene? Banged on the glass doors, screamed at one of the members during dinner, called him a thief, then passed out cold. Intoxicated? Possibly. But the police noted something else. She had a burn on her left forearm. Recent, not accidental. Wolfe stirred. I recognized the signs. The pieces weren't in place yet, but the corners of the puzzle were emerging. Get me her address, he said. She's being held in the Midtown precinct. Detox wing. Wolfe looked to me. I stood. I'll go. He raised a finger. Gently, Archie. No tricks, no pressure. If she's grieving, you must listen. If she's hiding something, you must tempt it out. And if she doesn't want to talk, then charm her. Not everyone's susceptible to charm, you know. I rely on your versatility. I left before he could call it a compliment. At Midtown, the station house smelled like old coffee, Lysol, and the kind of fear that clings to walls long after the cuffs come off. The detox nurse, a redhead with a baritone voice and no tolerance for small talk, led me to a holding room. Elizabeth Stannis looked like a wind-blown photograph, faded, creased, and too tired to lie. Her hair was the kind of blonde that had stopped pretending years ago. She sat hunched, arms folded tight, eyes tracking the dust, motes as if they were secrets. I took the chair opposite her. She didn't look at me. You're not a cop, she said. Nope. Lawyer. Worse. Private investigator. She gave a brittle laugh. Of course. Greer must be dead. I paused. You knew? I dreamed it. 2 nights ago. His shoes floated up in my sleep. I didn't write that down. You were involved with him? We worked together, years back. Accounting firm before he got fancy with the club crowd. He was clean back then. Nervous, but clean. What changed? She rubbed her arm absently, then winced at the burn. I think they got to him, she said. He called me frantic. Said something about a balance sheet not adding up. That someone was hiding expenses, big ones. Said he needed a favor. What kind of favor? A place to stay? Somewhere quiet. Said he couldn't trust his apartment anymore. Did he stay? Number he never showed. 2 days later, the news said he'd resigned. Then nothing. I leaned in. Do you know who he thought was behind it? She hesitated. He didn't say, but he kept repeating one name. Cal Arden. I knew the name. Cal Arden was on the Del Mar Club's board. Big game in Midtown politics, slicker than a buttered eel and about as trustworthy. Why scream at him outside the club? Because I thought he had something to do with it. He looked surprised, but I saw fear. I swear I saw it. I pointed to her arm. How'd that happen? She looked down as if surprised it was still attached. Fire. That night in the alley. I was there. I followed Greer's hint. Found the back pantry. I think he'd stashed something. But someone else got there first. She turned to me, finally. I saw someone run. Didn't get a good look. Male, gloves. Moved like he knew the place. I nodded, stood, and slipped my card onto the metal table. If you remember anything else, I'll dream it, she said. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was mid-course with his beer, the bottle resting like a relic on a linen square. She confirms Greer suspected embezzlement, I said. Mentions Cal Arden, and she was at the club the night of the fire. Wolfe didn't blink. And the burn? Matches the date. She may have interrupted someone removing evidence. Or she planted it herself, Wolfe said. What do you believe? She's not lying, just cracked. He accepted that, then reached for the apron again. He'd laid it out earlier on a silk cloth, examined every thread with a magnifier, and dictated a short note to Fritz about the stain composition. I found a faint trace of graphite powder in the upper fold, he said, hardly visible. Used in carbon copies, likely a ledger or duplicate receipt was wrapped in this. And the stain? Wine, he said, but not ordinary. A Syrah blend, expensive and rare. I blinked. You can tell that from a blot? I can tell many things, Archie. You merely notice them. Saul, seated quietly until then, tapped the folder again. Arden owns a private vineyard in Hudson Valley, bottles his own blend under a pseudonym, Harlington Cellars. Wolfe's smile was minimal, barely there, but real. It is time, he said, to invite Mr. Arden for a glass of his own truth. I stood. Want me to call? No, Wolfe said, and handed me a card. It was blank except for a typed sentence. Mr. Arden, I believe you've lost something. Come retrieve it. Wolfe smiled again, this time with teeth. Deliver it by hand, Archie. And bring the apron. It was just past 6 when I stepped out of the cab at 88 Rutherford Drive, Cal Arden's private address according to Saul's research, a Georgian townhouse with windows that didn't like to be looked through. It was the kind of place that made noise feel unwelcome. I rang the bell and waited with the package tucked under my arm, neatly wrapped in butcher paper. Inside was the apron, folded in thirds, like it had never known a kitchen or a corpse. A man in a tailored vest opened the door with a gaze that said he was used to denying people things. Mr. Arden doesn't take visitors. He'll take this, I said, handing him the envelope Wolfe had typed, and when he reads it, he'll know why I didn't leave my name. The man gave me a look sharp enough to cut linen and vanished without a word. I waited on the stone step, watching a pigeon hop sideways along the iron fence like it was pacing me. 2 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, it was Cal Arden himself. He was thinner than I remembered, probably because television ads pounds and campaign banners add charm. His hair was silver, his eyes were moss green, and his expression was the polite kind of amused that rich men wear before they sue you. He didn't invite me in. That was smart. I'm told you have something of mine, he said, glancing at the package. Maybe. Depends what you think you lost. He reached for the paper, but I kept it in my hand. I was told to deliver it to you directly, I said. Face to face. No handlers. No intermediaries. His smile flickered. Ah, Wolfe, of course. He stepped back and opened the door wider. Then let's talk. Inside was marble, minimalism, and the faint scent of something herbal and expensive. We walked to a sitting room that looked like it had never seen a sandwich, let alone a human being who ate one. I handed him the package. He opened it slowly, unwrapping the apron as though he expected a dead fish or a subpoena. When he saw what it was, his fingers paused. He didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then, calmly, "Where did you get this?" "It was sent to an old employee of yours, Mrs. Lattimore," with a note. His jaw shifted just slightly. "Is she all right?" "She's nervous. We all are. You tend to get that way when the man who tried to blow the whistle ends up in the East River." His eyes locked on mine. I don't know what Greer thought he was doing. He didn't understand how things work. He thought someone was hiding money, cooking books. Arden sat down. He didn't look rattled, but the effort not to look rattled was showing. "I presume Mr. Wolfe believes I had a hand in what happened to Greer." "Not yet, but he does wonder why this apron smells like your private Syrah." Arden looked down at it again, then rose and walked to the wet bar, pouring himself a drink. Not Syrah. Bourbon. He didn't offer me any. That was fine. I like to watch a man drink when he's cornered. I had nothing to do with his death, he said. I admit the finances of the Del Mara are complicated. There are members who prefer discretion, and discretion costs money. Greer was poking into accounts that were protected by necessity. That doesn't mean anyone killed him. Maybe, but it does mean someone wanted his suspicions erased. He took a sip. And you think this apron proves that? I think it was used to carry something. A ledger, maybe. Greer may have stashed it in the club. Someone found it, then returned the apron as a message. Why send it to Lattimore? Because she's honest, known, trusted. It would stir the water, force eyes on the past, maybe even flush someone out. Arden gave a soft laugh. Then it worked, didn't it? Too well, I said. Someone's dead, and someone's afraid enough to set fires in alleys and leave trail mix in aprons. He turned from me and stood at the window. You're not police, he said. Nope. Then why does Wolfe care? He doesn't like dirty puzzles, and this one's leaking grease. He finished his drink and came back to the table. His face was a little grayer now. There's someone on the board, he said slowly. Name's Lyle Wex. He's new money. Came in swinging. Started building connections, tightening contracts, moving people out. Greer didn't like him. Said he was siphoning consulting fees through a dummy company, Harlington Cellars. Number that's mine. Wex used something else. I never saw the records, but Greer told me he'd found 2 separate ledgers. Only one matched the books the board was reviewing. Double books? He nodded. Greer said if he turned it over, heads would roll, but that same week, his locker was broken into. He started sleeping at his office, and then he just quit. Arden, I said, do you know where he might have hidden the original ledger? Number, but if I had to guess, he'd have kept it somewhere in the club, not the lockers. Too obvious. Maybe the pantry, somewhere no one would think to look. Somewhere he had access, but no one else did. I took out my notepad. Would he have used a code? A label? He always called it the master list. Said it held everything, the dates, the vendor names, the routing codes. Arden moved to the mantel and tapped a silver frame. It held a photo of the club board. Greer was in it, so was Arden, and one man at the edge, tall, pale, narrow face, had a hand in his pocket like he didn't want to touch anyone. Wex, Arden said, tapping the photo. He's the one you want to watch. I stood. Thanks for the hospitality. He smirked faintly. Mr. Goodwin, I have no illusions about my virtue. But I didn't kill Greer, and I didn't burn down any pantry. I believe you, I said, which is more than I expected. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his usual repose, chewing slowly on roast duck, eyes closed like he was conducting an opera of taste. When I laid the apron on the desk again, he opened one eye. Did he confess? Number, but he gave us a name. Lyle Wex, new board member. Greer thought he was cooking the books. Wolfe sat forward. Excellent. That is our next move. Also, I added, Arden said Greer called the missing document the master list. If we can find it, we can end this. Wolfe stood, which, for Wolfe, is the equivalent of a marching band on fire. Then we must retrieve it. I blinked. We. He looked at me with narrowed eyes. Figuratively, you will go. I sighed. To the club? Tonight? After hours? Precisely. And how do you suggest I get in? He reached into his desk drawer and handed me a key. I stared. Saul, he said, found it in the apron's lining. Slipped into the hem. Our clever Mr. Greer left us the way in. I turned the key over in my hand. This is a bad idea, I muttered. Wolfe didn't disagree, but his eyes gleamed. Be cautious, he said. And remember, Archie, whoever took that ledger once may try to take it again. The key weighed heavier than it should have for its size, one of those old brass cuts that look like it ought to open a pantry or a broom closet, not the heart of a conspiracy. I pocketed it and left the brownstone around 9:40, just early enough to beat the closing shift at the Del Mar Club and just late enough to be noticed by no one who mattered. The cab dropped me 3 blocks out, and I walked the rest of the way. That stretch of East 63rd had quieted into the kind of stillness that makes city shadows feel personal. A single streetlight flickered on the corner, casting jittery light across the sidewalk like the scene couldn't decide if it wanted to stay visible. I rounded to the alley behind the club, where the service entrance loomed like a bad idea waiting to happen. The new panel on the pantry door was already fading into its surroundings. Sloppy paint or not, someone had made sure it didn't look like a scar. I slipped the key from my pocket and tried it in the lock. It turned. The door creaked open onto blackness. I stepped in, shut it behind me, and took a breath. No alarms. No footsteps. Just the faint smell of dry goods, cold tile, and bleach that tried too hard. I flicked on a small pen light. The pantry looked ordinary. Racks of flour, rice, and old tomato cans, labeled in that bland white-on-blue style clubs use when they want you to know nothing matters but the margins. But if Greer had hidden something in here, he hadn't done it with a velvet box and a spotlight. I moved slow, checking the undersides of shelves, looking for false panels, seams, anything that didn't belong. Near the back, beneath a stack of wax paper boxes, I found it. The tile on the floor had a square outline in dust. Subtle, but enough. I moved the boxes and tried the edge. It lifted with a metallic click, a small recess. Inside, a battered folder wrapped in an old plastic liner. I'd barely lifted it out when I heard it. A footstep. Software deliberate. I clicked off the light and froze. The club was supposed to be empty. The night crew had cleared out by 9:30. No reason anyone else should be here, unless they'd come for the same thing. I stayed low, tucked behind the dry goods rack, and listened. Another step. Closer now, and breathing. I could hear it, slow and careful. Whoever it was didn't want to be heard, which meant they were either paid to be quiet or terrified to be loud. Both options had sharp ends. I eased toward the door. My hand was still wrapped around the folder, and I didn't feel like handing it over to a stranger in the dark. The hallway outside the pantry was dim but open. I moved fast, silent, sticking to the wall until I hit the back stairwell. I heard the pantry door creak again behind me. They were inside now. That gave me seconds. I took the stairs up 1 level to the service lounge, a place I'd scoped during my earlier visit. Unused at night, closed off. I ducked in and crouched behind a row of lockers, listening. Silence. Then a creak of the floorboards near the pantry stairwell, the kind you only hear when someone's trying not to make one. I held my breath. A faint shape moved past the cracked doorway. Tall, hooded, moving like he'd walked the place 100 times. But he wasn't looking for me anymore. He was looking for what I'd taken. I waited until I couldn't hear him, then slipped out the side emergency exit, used the alley again, and circled 2 blocks before I flagged a cab. By the time I was back in the brownstone, Wolfe was still awake, which was unusual for that hour, though given what was in my hand, maybe not that unusual after all. He didn't ask if I had it. He just extended his hand. I handed it over. He opened the plastic with the kind of reverence most men reserve for wine bottles and verdicts. Inside was a manila folder marked Operations Master Ledger in Greer Square, accountant handwriting. Wolfe laid it flat on the desk, adjusted the lamp, and began leafing through. I poured myself a drink. "It's all here," he said finally. "Payments masked as maintenance, transfers disguised as grants, dozens of entries, each cleverly rerouted through shell entities tied to offshore custodianships. Wex? 3 layers removed, but unmistakable. He used a front agency called Huron Tide LLC, paper-formed in Delaware, no public face. But Greer traced the bank, routing to a firm that shares directors with Wex's real estate holdings. "And the wine stain?" I asked. Wolfe tapped the corner of one page. "Here, the last ledger entry, dated 2 days before Greer vanished. A note in the margin, locked back up in apron lining. The stain appears to have transferred from a glass during that moment, likely spilled while closing it." "Meaning Greer knew he didn't have long?" "Correct. He hid the ledger in the pantry, stained it in the rush, and sewed the key into the apron before it was taken. Then someone found the hiding spot, but not the key, and then sent the apron to Lattimore to distract us." Wolfe gave a nod. Not a bow, not a flourish. Just gravity. Wex knew Greer had something. When he didn't find it, he tried misdirection. The note, the return, the fire, all to blur the trail long enough to figure out who else might be looking. "Too late now," I said. "No," Wolfe replied. "Just early enough. We have the ledger, and now we bring them in." I blinked. "All of them?" "Yes," he said. "Call Lyle Wex. Invite him for a civil discussion. Then contact Arden, Mrs. Lattimore, and Elizabeth Stannis. We shall hold court." "Tonight?" "No," he said. "Tomorrow. Noon." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a tight turnaround." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Surprise is best used while it's still warm." He stood again, twice in the same day, which might have been a record, and rang for Fritz. I took that as my cue to handle the calls. Wex answered his phone with the guarded edge of a man who didn't like unknown numbers. "This is Goodwin," I said. "Nero Wolfe invites you to join him tomorrow at noon for a private resolution of an outstanding matter. It concerns a document that once belonged to Mr. Greer." Silence. Then, "I'll be there." One by one, I made the rest of the calls. They all agreed to come. Something told me they didn't have a choice. Not because Wolfe had leverage, but because he had the one thing that mattered more than proof. He had the final word. The next morning dawned gray and humorless, the kind of sky that suggested the city was waiting for bad news and trying to stay ahead of it. Wolfe rose earlier than usual, 10:30, which for him was nearly scandalous, and instructed Fritz to make the guest chairs in the office less intolerable. That meant he had decided on discomfort as strategy. I knew better than to ask. By 11:30, the brownstone was dressed for confrontation. The globe stood angled toward Portugal for no discernible reason. The orchids were misted, aligned, perfect. The master ledger was tucked beneath Wolfe's fingertips on the desk, like a document that might ignite under the wrong eyes. I'd cleaned up the office, but left the light dim for his preference. It made liars squint. They arrived one by one. First was Mrs. Lattimore, who entered with a kind of practiced humility I'd come to expect. She wore the same wrinkled cardigan and the same wary expression. She asked for nothing, took her seat in silence, and kept her hands folded in her lap like they might offend someone. Next came Elizabeth Stannis, still pale but steadier, her arms free of bandages, her hair combed. Her eyes moved sharply across the room when she entered, like someone looking for the exits but too proud to admit it. Then Cal Arden. He arrived in a black overcoat, no tie, collar loose, eyes clearer than yesterday. He gave me a curt nod and walked in like he owned the furniture. And finally, 10 minutes before noon, Lyle Wex. He wore confidence like a tailor-made suit, charcoal gray with a pocket square that probably cost more than my coat. He smiled like he was already bored, took the furthest seat from Wolfe and said, "I assume this won't take long." Wolfe ignored him entirely, waiting until the clock on the wall clicked to 12 before shifting forward in his chair and placing both palms flat on the desk. A courtroom gesture, one he only used when the verdict had already been written. "I thank you for coming," he said. "What follows will be brief. Mr. Goodwin, you will read the excerpt." I stepped forward with the folder and opened to the flagged page. Date, July 19th. Entry, Huron Tide LLC, maintenance disbursement, $42,800, routed through Northern Spoke Investments, signed by L. Wex. I paused. Nobody moved. I read the next. Date, July 22nd. Entry, Huron Tide LLC, consulting fee, $31,200. Same route, same signatory. Wex chuckled lightly. You're reading operational expenses, not indictments. Wolfe's eyes didn't flicker. Mr. Wex, your deflection is both tired and premature. I assure you, Wex said, smoothing his lapel. Whatever Greer fabricated or failed to understand about those entries, they were approved and within compliance. Every member of the board, including Mr. Arden here, had access to those reports. Arden shifted in his chair. Not those reports. We saw a sanitized version. Greer kept a separate ledger. Wex gave him a look of amused pity. Come now, Cal. That's convenient. Wolfe spoke again, slow and crisp. Mr. Greer discovered a pattern of internal siphoning, funds routed through third-party shell companies controlled indirectly by you. Upon realizing he was being monitored, he created a duplicate ledger, this one, and concealed it. He also ensured a method of retrieval, should anything happen to him. Wex leaned forward, his voice lower. Do you have proof that I created those companies? No, Wolfe replied, but I have the trail that leads to them. Greer's notes included contact names, purchase orders, and one very specific wine stain, transferred to the folder during the moment of concealment. Wex turned slightly, eyes narrowing. Wine stain. Your Syrah, Wolfe said. Harlington Cellars. Private label. Not for sale, not public. Served exclusively at 2 events, one of which was the board meeting Greer walked out of, the same night he vanished. Mrs. Lattimore stirred slightly. She began, then stopped. Wolfe turned to her. Yes, Mrs. Lattimore. Her voice was small. The apron. When I opened the box, there was a faint scent. I thought it was polish. Now I think it was wine. Heavy. Sweet Elizabeth Stannis spoke next. Greer mentioned the wine. Said it helped him remember the order of entries. The vintage. It was the only thing that hadn't been scrubbed. Wex looked from one to the other, calculating. Then he laughed again. You think that's evidence? An apron and a grape stain? No, Wolfe said. The evidence is in your hand. Wex blinked. What? The pen, Wolfe said. You've held it since you arrived. Same brand Greer preferred. It is a minor thing, but revealing. You took it from his desk, perhaps out of habit. You didn't even notice. His initials are etched beneath the clip. Wex dropped the pen. Silence. Wolfe continued. I summoned you here for one purpose, not to debate your guilt, though I consider it self-evident, but to offer a choice. He glanced toward me, then back to Wex. You can walk out of here and wait for the inevitable consequences. Police, board hearings, perhaps an indictment. Or you can sign a letter of full resignation from the Delmara Club, relinquish all claims and holdings associated with it, and remove yourself from its business permanently. Wex stared. That's blackmail. No, Wolfe said calmly. It's sanitation. Wex's eyes flicked to Arden. Arden gave him nothing. You're bluffing, Wex said. Am I? Wolfe replied, reaching into the drawer and removing a second copy of the ledger, photocopied, indexed, and labeled. I've made 6, he said. One has already been delivered to a legal contact. Wex's jaw tightened. He stood. For a moment, I thought he might walk out without a word, but then he turned back to the desk, reached for the resignation letter Wolfe had already prepared, typed on heavy ivory stock, and signed. He didn't look up as he left. The door closed behind him like a gavel. Wolfe turned to the remaining guests. Mr. Arden, he said, your complicity remains plausible but unproven. You have choices to make. I intend to make them, Arden said quietly. Mrs. Lattimore looked at Wolfe. What about Greer? Wolfe hesitated. Then, the truth will out. Wex may not have killed him, but he knows who did, or who ordered it. That evidence is not yet in my hand, but I will find it. Elizabeth rose. If you do, I'll testify. Wolfe nodded once. They left soon after, one by one, like characters exiting a stage after the final curtain. When the room was empty again, I sat down across from Wolfe and let out a long breath. That was a performance, I said. No, he replied. That was justice, trimmed of ceremony. He closed the folder gently. And dinner, he added, will be trout with mustard glaze. You've earned your appetite. I stood, smiling faintly. The case wasn't over, not completely. But the ledger was back, the liar was out, and Greer's quiet fight had found a voice. In Wolfe's world, that counted as a victory. I didn't expect the doorbell to ring again that night. Not after the ledger had been laid bare, the resignation signed, and Wolfe had declared trout and victory in equal measure. But sometime around 9, just as Fritz was clearing the last of the plates and I was contemplating a second slice of lemon tart I hadn't earned, the bell rang once. Firm, not urgent. The kind of ring that carried intention. I opened the door. It was Elizabeth Stannis. Her coat was unbuttoned, her hands bare, and her face held none of the guarded poise she'd worn earlier. Something had changed. I'm sorry, she said. I know it's late. I stepped aside. If Wolfe throws you out, I'll walk you to the curb myself. She gave the ghost of a smile and walked in. Wolfe was in the office, thumbing through a monograph on rare Balkan fungi that probably weighed more than most dictionaries. He didn't look up when I entered, but he knew she was there before I said her name. Miss Stannis, he said flatly. I presume your visit is necessary. She nodded. You need to know what really happened to Greer. I closed the door behind her. She didn't sit. She remained standing, eyes flicking between us, as if she were rehearsing something that had already been too long rehearsed. I lied to you, she said. About the fire. About why I was there. Wolfe didn't flinch. Yes, I gathered. Her voice dropped a note. I set it. I didn't mean to. Not really, but I was desperate. I thought I could scare whoever was tailing me. Make noise. Draw attention. I didn't know Greer was already dead. I leaned forward. You're saying he was dead before the fire? She nodded. 2 nights before. He called me, frantic. Said he had proof, but he couldn't trust the board, or even the police. Said he'd made copies, hidden them, and if anything happened to him, someone would find them. He told you this on the phone? Number that night. I went to his place. He let me in, handed me a bag. Documents, I thought. But when I got home, there was nothing in it but a bottle of wine and a typed quote. Just a line from Kafka. The meaning of life is that it stops. I thought he'd lost it. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. But when I went back the next day, she continued, his apartment was sealed. The doorman said he'd left town. I knew that wasn't true. And yet you waited days before raising alarm, Wolfe said. She looked down. Because I still had the bottle. It was from Harlington Cellars. I thought maybe there was a clue in it. But when I opened it, I realized... She stopped. I stepped in. Realized what? Her mouth twisted. There was a key, wrapped in wax, in the base of the cork. Wolfe sat straighter. Another key. She nodded. I didn't know what it was for. I tried it at Greer's office. His storage locker. Nothing. Then I remembered he used to joke about hiding the real stuff. Somewhere too dull to notice. That's why I went to the pantry that night. Wolfe folded his hands. And set the fire. I brought a flare stick. I wasn't thinking straight. Just wanted someone to notice me snooping. But someone else was already there. A man. Gloved. Fast. I think he'd found the ledger already, or tried to. I exchanged a look with Wolfe. We assume that part, I said. You're filling in the frame. Elizabeth reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled paper. This was in the cork, too. I didn't show it before because I didn't want to implicate myself. Wolfe held out his hand. She passed the note over. He unfolded it. I stood behind him to read it. Typed. No signature. If they get to me, tell Wolfe. He's the only one who understands chess from the middle game. The key is not the ledger. It's the move no one's made yet. Wolfe's brow furrowed. A metaphor? I asked. No, he murmured. A strategy. Elizabeth looked confused. He wanted you involved? He calculated I might become involved once the apron resurfaced. Greer understood that if he couldn't survive the opening moves, he'd need someone to finish the board. I stared. You think he planned all this? Parts of it, Wolfe said. He knew he wouldn't survive long with the ledger out of his hands. So he split the evidence, ledger, wine bottle, key, note, like pieces in a chess endgame, designed to be recovered not linearly, but consequentially. Elizabeth sank into the chair finally. So what now? Wolfe stood 3 times in 48 hours, a personal record. Now we determine what the last piece is. I glanced at the note. The key is not the ledger. So what is it? Wolfe looked at me, then turned back to Elizabeth. Did Greer ever mention having insurance? She shook her head. Only in jokes. Said he couldn't insure what mattered most. Wolfe snapped his fingers once. Exactly. I blinked. What does that mean? Greer made backups, yes. But he also anticipated those backups could be intercepted. What he needed was a trigger. Something that could initiate the unraveling even if he were gone. Like what? Wolfe stared at the Kafka quote, then the ledger, then finally the wine bottle Elizabeth had left on the desk. The ledger is the record, he said. But the key, the actual key, is something that proves Wex knew Greer had it. Not just the embezzlement, the fear of discovery. That fear had to be documented. Elizabeth leaned forward. So he had something more? Wolfe nodded. He had a recording, an audio file perhaps, a confrontation, hidden, untraceable. I caught on. The move no one's made yet. He pointed at the ledger. There's a list of entries for Delmara's tech expenses. Consultants, hardware, odd for a club like that. One of them is for a transcription service, another for a cloud storage contract. Greer used club funds to hide evidence on their own servers. Elizabeth's eyes widened. You can access that? Wolfe turned to me. You can. I didn't argue. It took 4 hours and 2 phone calls to Saul to pull the thread. But by 2 a.m., I had the login credentials from a back-end platform tied to the Delmara Club's bookkeeping software. Greer had left a folder buried under a fake shell account. Inside was a single audio file. I played it. First silence. Then 2 voices, Greer and Wex. Mid-argument. Greer's voice was tight. You think I'll roll over, Wex? I have it, and I've copied it. Wex replied, lower, colder. I don't need to stop you, Greer. I only need to delay you. More scuffling. Then a sharp sound, metal on tile. A final line from Wex. Don't be stupid. That ledger will disappear, and you with it. Click. I looked at Wolfe. He was already dialing. Lieutenant Kramer, he said when the line picked up. Yes, you'll want to hear this. And bring a warrant. The man you're looking for is Lyle Wex, and the charge is no longer embezzlement. I sat back. The final move had been made. Greer hadn't just ensured the truth, he'd ensured justice. By the time Kramer arrived at the brownstone, dawn was doing its half-hearted job of smudging the skyline with color. He didn't knock, he pounded, like the door had insulted his badge. I opened it, coffee in one hand, and gave him my best "you're lucky I'm awake" look. Where is he? He grunted. In the office, I said. Try not to chip the furniture. He blew past me in a huff, trench coat flaring like a cape in a bad stage play. When Kramer's that early and that silent, he's either furious or impressed, and the line between those two is so thin it needs a magnifier. Wolfe didn't rise when Kramer entered. He barely glanced up from the transcription he'd had me print out from Greer's audio file. The original audio was secure, backed up in triplicate, one copy already couriered to Wolfe's attorney, the other prepared for the DA's office. Kramer stood with hands planted on the edge of Wolfe's desk, scowling like a man who'd bitten into something sour and recognized the flavor. Tell me this is real. Wolfe reached for his beer, his second of the morning, which meant the day had already required soothing, and said, It is authentic, verified, and admissible. The voice print matches Wex. Greer recorded it the day before he disappeared. Kramer turned to me. And the rest of it? The ledger, the account trail, the ledger key. You're telling me you two pulled all that out of a pantry? I pulled it, I said. Wolfe just watched from the balcony of his intellect. Kramer grunted. And Wex? You think he killed Greer? Wolfe placed his glass down with a soft clink. I do not think, Lieutenant. I conclude. The recording captures motive, intention, and implicit threat. Coupled with the physical evidence, misappropriated funds, forged entries, and a pattern of concealment, Mr. Wex will have difficulty explaining himself to a jury, or even to his attorney. Kramer straightened, face hardening into the resolve of a man who just realized the paperwork was going to last longer than the arrest. I'll have a squad at his place in 30 minutes. I want the ledger copies, the original audio, and the witness statements, and I want that woman, the one who burned the pantry. I lifted a brow. She's not the villain in this story. She committed arson. She also risked her neck to find the truth. She'll testify, Wolfe said, as will Mr. Arden and Mrs. Lattimore. I will arrange for statements, but I will not surrender Miss Stannis to your custody this morning. Kramer glared. She interfered in an active crime scene. Wolfe tilted his head, and your department misidentified a homicide as a suicide. Shall we begin assigning errors? That brought us a long silence. Kramer finally exhaled through his nose, pulled a pad from his coat, and scribbled with the irritation of a man conceding to logic he didn't want. I want her downtown before the end of the day, he muttered. You get 1 hour. More than sufficient, Wolfe said. Archie? I gave Kramer a salute that wasn't entirely respectful and headed for the hall. Elizabeth was already in the front room, sipping the tea Fritz had brought. Her eyes met mine before I spoke. I'm guessing I'm not being invited for brunch. More like brunch with cross-examination, but Wolfe bought you time. 1 hour. She nodded once. I'll talk to them. I want to. We rode downtown together, just the two of us in a cab that smelled like someone's late-night regrets. She was quiet most of the way, staring out the window like the city might blink first. When she finally spoke, it was so soft I almost missed it. I should have done more. I should have told someone when Greer first warned me. You did enough, I said. You made sure his voice didn't vanish. Her hand was clenched in her lap. I didn't want him to be another lost file. He's not. She didn't reply, but I saw the smallest drop of tension fall from her shoulders. The precinct didn't treat her like a criminal. Kramer made good on Wolfe's influence. Elizabeth gave her statement, confirmed her account of Greer's last day, the fire, the discovery of the key, and the existence of the Kafka note. They asked her to return for potential testimony and let her go with a warning that felt more like gratitude than reprimand. By noon, she was back at her apartment. I walked her up just to be sure. You'll be okay? I asked. She looked tired, but there was something steadier in her now, like the fear had found somewhere else to live. I will, she said. You're sure it's over? Almost, I said. Wex will fold. He has nowhere left to stand. She didn't say anything else. just gave me a look that landed somewhere between thanks and farewell. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant room. I found him standing among the orchids, gently misting a rare genus with the kind of attention he rarely gave humans. "You're relaxed," I said. "I am never relaxed," he replied. "But I am satisfied." "That's practically emotional for you." He eyed me. "Kramer called. Wex was arrested without incident. They found a burner phone in his desk and financial notes that matched entries in the ledger. He'll break, likely before arraignment." "That just leaves the murder." "Indeed. And that, Archie, is where we complete the circle." He returned the sprayer to its shelf and brushed a leaf tenderly. Then he turned. "Have Saul checked Greer's phone records again? Not just calls, texts, messages? I believe Greer left one final clue." I didn't argue. I made the call. 2 hours later, Saul sent over the transcript. A single text, sent at 1:13 a.m., 2 nights before Greer's body was found. To Elizabeth Stannis. Message: "If anything happens to me, look in the glass. They always look away from the glass." I read it twice before handing it over. Wolfe barely blinked. He's not speaking metaphorically. "The glass." He means the mirror. "What mirror?" "In his office," Wolfe said. "He had one mounted behind his desk. An old habit. Said it helped him see who was watching him." I was already moving toward the phone. "You want me to get over there?" "Now." The club had been closed for 2 days, pending internal review. A call from Wolfe to the board had secured us a 10-minute entry window under supervision. I arrived just after 3 and made my way straight to Greer's old office. It was quiet, unused, and just as he'd left it. The mirror hung above the credenza, dustless but ordinary, until I leaned close and saw the edge, a thin seam between the glass and the frame. I reached behind it. There, taped flat against the back, was a thumb drive. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe plugged it into a secured reader. It contained a single video file, security footage, from the club, the hallway near the service pantry. Time stamped 1 hour before Greer's estimated time of death. Wex, alone, dressed in club uniform, carrying something tucked in cloth. He paused at the pantry door, looked around, entered. 3 minutes later, he emerged empty-handed. Then he made a call, just visible at the edge of the frame. A call we'd already seen on his record, to a burner number later traced to a private dock. Wolfe sat back. "There," he said. The ledger was hidden, the trail laid, and the killer walked into the one place he thought no one was watching. I sat across from him. He knew the club cameras were off in most rooms, but not the pantry hallway. Wolfe nodded. He looked away from the glass, but Greer didn't. The silence stretched. Then Wolfe lifted his glass. "To Mr. Greer," he said almost quietly. "An accountant who understood leverage." I raised mine too. "To the last move." And we drank as the orchids bloomed quietly around us. We drank in silence for a moment longer. Wolfe with his amber-hued bear, me with something less noble, but more familiar. The clink of the glasses was the only punctuation to the stillness in the office. It was a stillness earned, not gifted. The kind that follows only when a final piece fits where it was never meant to, but somehow always belonged. Then Wolfe said, almost idly, "Do you know what I admire about Mr. Greer?" I waited. He had the foresight to plan his death as if it were the beginning of an argument, not the end. I leaned back in my chair. "That's a grim way to admire a man." "It is a precise way," Wolfe replied. He understood that truth, when handled properly, can outlive the man who wields it. It merely requires design. He stood again, pacing the rug with a rhythm he rarely indulged, like a bear testing the boundaries of a new enclosure. Wex will deny the video, of course, he said. He'll claim it shows nothing definitive. But it places him at the scene, carrying an item he later tried to retrieve and calling a number traced to the dock where Greer was found. It's not just circumstantial, I said. It's choreography. Precisely, Wolfe replied. Greer staged his death like a trap. The ledger was the bait, the wine bottle, the key, the apron. Each misdirection served a single purpose: to provoke a reaction from Wex. And he gave it, I said. He burned the pantry, followed Elizabeth, sent the apron to stir things up, and walked right into Greer's mirror. Wolfe turned to me. And now he will walk into a courtroom. I gave a half nod. So that's it then. The board cleans house. Arden tries to act noble, and Mrs. Lattimore retires to her kitchen knowing her apron started a revolution. Justice, Wolfe said, is rarely theatrical. It is procedural, but in this case, it is also, he hesitated, poetic. There was a knock at the door. Fritz appeared, holding a sealed envelope. For you, sir? It was just delivered. Wolfe took it with a frown, opened it, and read. His frown deepened. He passed it to me without a word. Inside was a typed letter, unsigned. Nero Wolfe. There's a name missing from your theory. Someone who helped Greer, someone he trusted. Someone who knew about the ledger and about Wex's fears. Someone who warned Wex before Greer vanished. That someone is still out there, and they don't want to be found. Don't confuse resolution with conclusion. There was no letterhead, just crisp courier type on clean white paper. I whistled. Anonymous tip. No, Wolfe said, voice flat. Anonymous provocation. You think it's real? I think it's not entirely false. He walked to the window and stared out, hands clasped behind his back. Greer played a long game, but it would have required help. Someone to place the mirror recording, someone to create the server access, possibly even someone to redirect the financial trail long enough for him to compile it. I turned the letter over. Nothing on the back. No markings. Whoever wrote it knew how to stay invisible. You think it was someone inside the club? I think, Wolfe said, there is a fourth player on the board. I didn't like the sound of that. 3 players already made the case twist enough to make a Rubik's Cube jealous. A fourth meant someone clever enough to stand in the light and not cast a shadow. I picked up the phone. Want me to bring Saul back in? Not yet, Wolfe said. Let them breathe. Whoever sent this wants us watching Wex, which suggests they no longer feel watched. That's gutsy. Or desperate, Wolfe replied. We shall see. I turned the envelope over again. You think this is Arden? No, Wolfe said without hesitation. He lacks subtlety, and he's too invested in salvaging his reputation to re-stir the sediment. What about Stannis? She's still recovering, and she has nothing to gain. Lattimore? Please, Wolfe said. Which left nobody. Or worse, someone we hadn't met at all. I rubbed my eyes. Well, this got less poetic fast. It got more accurate, Wolfe replied, which is what matters. We were interrupted again, this time by the phone. I answered. It was Kramer. His voice was low, clipped. Wex won't talk, he said. He lawyered up fast. But get this. He tried to delete an email account this morning, one we didn't know about. We've got our IT guys scraping it now. What's in it? Not sure, but it was connected to a contact labeled only Shadow. I blinked. Clever. No IP trace yet, Kramer continued. But the sender had admin access to parts of the club's server, probably the one who created the storage path for the ledger. Which means they're real, I said. Greer had help. Kramer sighed. You tell Wolfe we might need another round, and soon. I hung up and relayed the news. Wolfe didn't speak for a while. Then, We will not pursue shadows in haste. We will study their movements. You think they'll reach out again? They already have. I looked at the envelope. And next time, Wolfe sat down and opened his drawer. From it, he pulled a sheet of thick notepaper and uncapped his pen. We write back. He began composing, slow, deliberate, balanced. Greer set the board, he said without looking up. But the game is not over. I sat down across from him again, leaned back, and watched him write. The orchids bloomed in their rows. The city continued its endless hum outside, and somewhere, someone who had helped build a trap for a killer was still walking free. Wolfe finished the letter with a final stroke of his fountain pen, his eyes narrowing as he folded the paper with the precision of a man sealing not just an envelope, but a challenge. It was addressed generically, no name, no title, just one word typed at the top of the page. Shadow. I'd seen Wolfe deploy logic like a blade before, but this was different. He was laying bait, just as Greer had done, and he was doing it with full knowledge that whoever this hidden player was, they had already outmaneuvered everyone once before. Are we mailing that? I asked. No, Wolfe said. We're placing it. He tapped the envelope lightly against his palm. This individual does not want discovery, but they do want attention, on their terms. They wouldn't have sent that note unless they were sure it would stir us, and only us. That means they expect a reply. So where? Wolfe considered this only a second. The club, he said. Of course. Their playground, their stage, their vantage. You'll place it tonight in the boardroom, beneath the ledger cabinet. And if they're watching, then we give them something to watch. He left the envelope on the desk and leaned back in his chair, hands laced together across his chest. Archie, the key is no longer evidence. The key is curiosity, and we will make them itch. By the time night settled in, the plan was clear. Fritz prepared a decoy ledger, identical in size, weight, and labeling to the one that had brought Wex to ruin, and I stashed it in a briefcase, along with Wolfe's envelope. Wolfe would remain behind, of course, on his throne of logic and orchids. I, naturally, would be the errand boy sneaking into a building where someone might, or might not, be waiting. The Del Mara Club had reopened that morning. Just a soft reset. The usual lights on, the chairs rearranged, the boardroom aired out like it hadn't been the scene of an unspooling empire. Saul had secured temporary janitorial credentials for me. Badge, clipboard, coveralls, and all. I slipped in through the rear entrance at exactly 11:07 p.m., timing it to coincide with a scheduled HVAC check on the upper floors. That gave me 12 minutes of official invisibility. The boardroom was empty, dimly lit, elegant, smelling faintly of cedar polish and cover-up. The cabinet where the original ledger had once been locked was still there. Now a relic, a museum case holding secrets that had already exploded. I crouched low, slipped the envelope behind the bottom panel beneath the cabinet, and stood. Then I waited. 10 minutes passed. 15. The hum of the HVAC kicked in above me, an artificial storm overhead. I turned toward the door, but I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the doorway, still, silent. I didn't speak. Neither did they. The person stepped in slowly, hooded sweatshirt, gloves, face masked by the dark. Then a voice, low and precise. You shouldn't have responded. Yet here you are, I said, not moving. They didn't advance, but they also didn't retreat. You think you've closed the case, the voice said, but you only severed a head. The body still breathes. I don't need riddles, I said. Just names. You had one, they said. Wex was only the tip. Greer knew that. He wanted more than exposure. He wanted collapse, but he couldn't bear to finish what he started. So you helped him? I positioned him, that's all. The wine bottle, the mirror, the server. You're the one who built the trail. I built the pressure, they replied. Wex cracked. That's what Greer wanted. He believed in rot through weakness, not through confrontation. You think this is noble? No, they said quietly. I think it's finished. The voice faltered slightly on that word, like a chord unresolved. I stepped closer, not reaching, not threatening. Then why send the letter? A pause. Because I wanted to see if you'd recognize it. Recognize what? That sometimes justice needs two cowards to build it, one to speak and one to stay silent. I took another step. Greer was no coward. Not to you, they said, but he couldn't carry it alone, and I couldn't carry him. Their voice caught, and I understood then this wasn't strategy anymore. It was mourning. You were close to him, I said. They didn't answer. Instead, they turned and walked back toward the door. I followed slowly, but by the time I reached the hallway, they were gone. I searched the stairwell, the emergency exits, the staff corridor. Nothing. Ghost. Back at the brownstone, I recounted every word. Wolfe didn't interrupt. He sat in perfect stillness, absorbing the voice, the phrasing, the silences. When I finished, he spoke softly. Male or female? Couldn't tell. The voice was shaped for disguise, not identity. But the tone... Grief, Wolfe said. I nodded. He folded his hands and stared into the middle distance. There is a confession in there, Archie. Not legal, but moral. Whoever they were, they made sure Wex was exposed, but not dismantled. They helped shape the truth, then withdrew just before it became flame. Greer's partner, I said. Or conscience, Wolfe replied. We sat in the thick quiet of early morning. The office now held no tension, only residue. So what now? I asked. Now, Wolfe said. We leave it. You're serious? I am. The ledger is public. The charges are in motion. The board will be purged. And Greer's voice, though posthumous, has altered the course. And the person in the hallway? If they remain quiet, they remain free. And if they don't? Wolfe looked at me then, his eyes sharp and unreadable. Then they will return, and we will be waiting. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered in rows of golden stillness. The city slept, or pretended to. Behind me, Wolfe resumed his chair. He reached again for the mirror-black envelope he hadn't mailed. His second letter, the one he'd written just in case the first didn't reach. He didn't open it. He didn't destroy it. He placed it gently in the drawer beside the others. Proof that even in chess, not every piece must be played. Sometimes it's enough just to be seen. It was 3 days before the dust truly settled. Wex had been formally charged. Fraud, obstruction, and, as of yesterday, second-degree murder, based on the recording and corroborating evidence Saul traced through the burner accounts. The district attorney's office issued a press release so carefully worded it might have been composed by a man trying not to wake a sleeping lion. The Delmara Club, once a quiet institution of old money and private sins, suspended its entire board and announced an external audit. Wolfe's influence extending even into the marble veins of their rotunda. Elizabeth Stannis agreed to testify. Cal Arden, perhaps out of pride or guilt or both, opted not to. Mrs. Lattimore sent a handwritten note thanking Wolfe for restoring her kitchen to sanity. It came with a pie. Fritz threw it away. I suspect Wolfe took that harder than the case, and the shadow, whoever they truly were, vanished into their silence like it was a second skin. No second message, no cryptic footprints, just that one encounter left behind like the echo of a conscience. I found Wolfe in the plant room that evening, the orchids glowing under the lamplight like a room full of secrets that had learned not to speak. He was misting a rare variant with a curved stem, his shoulders relaxed. Wolfe's version of peaceful. "You missed dinner," I said, stepping inside. "I needed stillness," he replied. "Something clean." "I could have sent you soup." Broth is not stillness, Archie. It is interruption disguised as mercy. I let that one go. We walked back to the office together. The air inside was cooler than usual, quiet in that measured way it gets after a storm's gone through and left only rearranged furniture and memory. I sat, watching him ease into his chair. I keep thinking about Greer, I said. About how much he planned, how much he knew. Yes, Wolfe said. He was no hero, but he was precise. That shadow, whoever helped him, they played it almost perfectly. They did, Wolfe said. They were the axis upon which the entire case turned. Without their guidance, Greer might have been lost to silence. Without their restraint, the case might have drowned in noise. You still don't want to pursue them? No. Even though they lied, hid, played both sides. Especially because of that, Wolfe said. They had the means to do more damage. They did not. That is not innocence, Archie. But it is a choice. I stared at him for a beat. You're letting them go. I am choosing, he said, to value the result over the confession. Silence settled again, but it wasn't heavy. I stood, walked to the desk, and opened the bottom drawer. The mirror black envelope Wolfe had never sent was still there, sealed, untouched. I suppose this stays unread. It was never for them, Wolfe said. It was for me. I returned it to its place and closed the drawer. Kramer asked if you'd testify. I gave him my notes, Wolfe said. He'll manage. He also said he still doesn't understand how you figured out the timeline. Wolfe's eyes twitched, almost amused. The wine, the mirror, the ledger, but more importantly, the silence. Greer stopped moving 2 days before Wex made his call. The only reason to delay a body in the river is panic. Wex didn't panic until someone told him Greer's plan had survived. Elizabeth? Number the shadow. The message wasn't meant for Greer. It was meant for Wex, and it worked. I exhaled slowly. You really think Greer planned even that? I think, Wolfe said, he trusted the right person at the wrong time, which is what most tragedies begin with, and what most victories are built upon. That sounded like a final line. It wasn't. Wolfe stood, 4th time this case, a clear violation of his usual standards, and walked to the window. The orchids swayed faintly in the draught behind him. He died with his ledger hidden, Wolfe said, voice softer. But his story found air. That is not nothing. No, I said. It's not. Wolfe turned back, eyes sharp once more. Archie, bring me my beer, then close the file. You got it. I reached for the case folder, the apron soaked in secrets, and slid it into the cabinet. The lock clicked behind it with a finality I didn't expect to feel. I brought him his beer. He took it, sat again, and finally, allowed himself the smallest smile. Greer was right, he said. About what? Chess is not won in the opening. I grinned. You ever going to teach me that game properly? No, Wolfe said, but you've already learned it. We drank. The office dimmed around us. The city outside breathed its usual rhythms. And behind us, the orchids kept blooming, quiet, steady, exact. Just like the truth, 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 just like the truth,